this is a question for Tarun. My name is Suresh Kumar. I'm part of the diaspora that you referred to. Could you spell it out a little more in detail? What exactly you meant when you referred to the diaspora contribution or enlarging the diaspora impact?
Sure, very briefly. I mean, if you look again at the example that I gave of Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, it's a good example. It started off as a bank in China financing trade for Chinese companies, and as Chinese companies spread or entrepreneurs spread, it followed them. And essentially, they've used the Chinese population in different cities around the world, which, as you know, Chinese are wonderful entrepreneurs outside of mainland China. It used them as a beachhead to begin to create a profitable business model that was self-sustaining in each country into which they went, and then use that beachhead to expand outside. Indian banks are beginning to take a page from this and providing sort of private wealth management services to Indian communities around the world now. But it's the same model really that they're trying to expand. So that's one idea, sort of use the diaspora as a way of entering much bigger and larger markets. The other is the diaspora is a source of information, which is sort of on the input side for most companies. That if you think about what it takes to expand overseas, you basically need access to things that are very hard to get. And the primary thing that's hard to get is really fine-grained information about where the opportunities are, where the pitfalls are. And the diaspora is a good way to tap into. I mean, this is essentially much of the stuff that's going on in Bangalore and in Silicon Valley is, as you know, consequences back and forth of the diaspora. So both, I'd say, on the revenue side of the equation and on the cost side of the equation, the diaspora can be a very helpful way to get the business started and to get through all the startup pains that businesses normally have.
My question is to Anand. Anand, if we have to create so many multinationals across the globe, I think the young India has to play a very important role, and the young India has to have a global mindset. What are your suggestions to make India develop that global mindset?
I think those statistics are now being sort of offered out sort of quite dramatically. The one about how I think 70% of India's population is under 40. I think about 50 is under 25. So clearly any initiative to change the landscape here, or to change even the psychological landscape has to begin in that area. So happily, I think in CII as well, wearing my CII hat, I remember just 2 days ago, there was the annual, or the first inaugural meeting, national meeting of the Young Indians, it's called YI, out of CII. And I think there were over 1,000 delegates who showed up at Vigyan Bhavan. It's quite an inspiring sight. And I remember remarking to my colleague Tarun that I think in the last year I've been here, that's probably the most significant event that's occurred. And I remember ending my talk there by saying that I'm also, despite carrying a reputation as an eternal optimist, I do suffer mortal bouts of despondency now and then. But it's times like that when I see people out there, see the energy, see the articulation, the intelligence there. I don't think we have to teach them anything, frankly. I go back to my tropical garden out. I think we just have to get out of their way. We just have to enable them. Water the plants, just get the hell out of the way. And I think they will show us the way to whatever promised land lies ahead of us.
I'm a writer from Sweden, Europe, and I was very interested in the last point about the importance of seeing more Indians in the classroom. Now, most of continental Europe and Northern Europe hasn't reached that stage yet, so we don't know as much about India as do the students of HBS. And therefore, I wonder from both of you if you have a particular message to Europe, if there's anything we should or could do to encourage future Indian MNCs, better cooperation and exchange with India.
That's a bit of a tough one. I guess the one sensible thing that I could probably say is to start in the small. Sometime back when the software boom was at its height, I remember Germany put out this requisition for software engineers, and essentially nobody would go. And it had to do with this feeling, at least when I sort of spoke to, and there were a couple of German companies that came to HBS also to recruit. And remember, sort of, they were very frustrated at not being able to hire anybody. And ultimately it came down to having a feeling of comfort in the particular society that was just not there. Now, that's not a comment on Germany or a comment on the German people or anything of that sort. It's just that the societies hadn't had the experience with creating the infrastructure to make foreigners feel welcome. And I think that's something that Europe personally is still struggling with. I mean, you see the issue with the Turkish workers in Germany, the Northern Africans in southern France. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, you look at Marseille, a town, it's a beautiful town on the southern coast of France, and it's very revealing because Marseille is a city of immigrants. Marseille has been built over 200 years by wave after wave of immigrants. And in Marseille, the wave of immigrants that just came in, hardly 20 years ago is objecting to the next wave of immigrants. And that mentality has to go away. And I think when that does, that's when the barriers will fall. I suppose companies being proactive with interacting with India, which is already happening from Europe a fair bit, is going to be a step in that direction also, because it will encourage awareness of Indians in that part of the world. I'd say England probably doesn't fall into that category, because there obviously is a very large diaspora population in England, and if you go to London Business School, the classrooms are pretty full of Indians as well. So.
Just a quick additional comment. I'm paraphrasing Tarun in a sense, but I think the number of Indians you'll attract is directly proportional to the openness of the society there. This is what is, in a sense, what he's saying. Because Indians happen to be, I think, amongst the most global of all creatures on this planet. We assimilate wherever we go. We learn new languages. I don't believe this stuff about English being the barrier. The Indians learn languages very fluently. So it's a very interesting index. It's like the Big Mac index for currencies. I think if a country wants to measure how open a society it is, it might be in measuring how many Indians are in their classrooms. But having said that, I also want to say the good news is that more and more I meet Indians who are saying they're not going to go to Harvard, and their prime choice is actually INSEAD. And that's because they find that they find Harvard, and we've been discussing this at the school. Harvard is still very America-centric. It's still very U.S. capitalist model-centric. And they're finding, and I think more and more multinationals are finding that the best international managers, the best global managers are actually coming from schools like INSEAD, which somehow have internationalism written into their core values. So you probably may want to encourage more clones of INSEAD, and you'll actually see a diversion of a lot of Indians there.
Mr. Chairman, can I pick up on that comment for a second? This is actually a very interesting point, because what's happening, Anand is right. Anand sits on various advisory boards that I'm a part of at Harvard also. But pressure with regard to internationalization from places like IMEDE in Lausanne in Switzerland and INSEAD in Fontainebleau is causing Harvard to reevaluate its traditional American-centric view. And this is the process of competition that we need to continue to foster to create the tropical garden that Anand is talking about. If we have competition between the IIMs, with the government out of the way, with price setting and so on, with the ISBs and so on and so forth, that is going to just unleash an amazing amount of creativity. So when Anand says getting out of the way and letting the tropical garden grow, what we really need to do is to create the infrastructure for competition to flourish at the level of intermediaries like business schools, private equity providers, executive search firms, all the stuff that you need to make good markets work well. Just get competition in, and that's going to help. I'm sorry, this isn't your question, but it piggybacked off Anand's point.
My name is Madhur Bajaj. My respect for professors from Harvard Business School enhances when I see products like Anand, though the downside is that 4 of my closest relatives are from Harvard Business School. More seriously, I think Anand, you mentioned that we need success stories because that nurtures more success stories. I didn't hear any one of you mention about examples of India. Do we have any multinationals? Truly multinationals or global companies in India, and do they follow some of the models which you talked about?
Tarun, why don't you answer that? Because this is what Tarun was referring to. At CII, we've actually, Devinder has asked Tarun to create a globalization index by which not only will we be able to, in a rough and ready manner, measure how many companies in India are truly global and what they need to do to get there.
The short answer is I don't think we're equipped yet to answer, but hopefully in a couple of months we will be. Just to elaborate in 15 seconds, what we've done so far is to create a core group of 20 or 30 companies that have volunteered to be bludgeoned on the head by me and forced to divulge all matter of information that they find inconvenient to collect. with the hope that these are companies that are pioneers from India in going outside, even though they still don't match up to global standards of how international they are. But once we get the data from them, I will try to make it much simpler, with the notion being that we probably have some kind of virtual interface that any Indian company could tap into and measure itself on certain standards and make it easy for them to realize how global or unglobal they are. And once we have that running, I think at least we have, again, the virtual infrastructure to quantify, measure, to think about progress, and so on and so forth. But in direct response to your question, I mean, I think of the Windows company, Ranbaxy, as being a company that's trying to go pretty global, and in some ways has, in some ways hasn't. Probably TCS is a good one. The TCS is not always the most forthcoming with information, so it's not quite clear exactly what the detailed models are that they subscribe to. So we do have some examples. I think Wipro and Infosys are atypical because their business is very different from the typical pattern that I suggested, which is embrace your neighbors. They are predicated on extreme arbitrage between the United States and primarily and India. So those are a little bit different from the normal pattern.
I just want to ask one question. I think about MNCs. What I find is that there seems to be a singular lack of Indian companies who even have ambitions to be MNCs to invest in marketing, to building brand images. Even if you look at Wipro, Infosys, well-known names, but they're actually just service providers. They don't build their own brand name. I'd like a comment from both of you. Is this something which you don't think is necessary, or is it something which you think is something which Indian companies must look at in a very serious manner if they want to become MNCs?
Tarun, as I mentioned in my talk, I think that's key. And I think we don't understand the need for building brands, not only as a way of entering markets, because sometimes that's not the best way to enter a market, but that the end game has to be a brand, because that's the only way you're going to fortify your presence anyway. There's a very old standard case study of Samsung and the microwave business, where it decided to actually become a supplier to GE and built economic scale. And while GE was sleeping, it suddenly woke up one morning and found it was getting all its microwave ovens made out in Korea. And then they went to the next stage, which is from contract manufacturing. They went into doing their own low-cost experimentation, so became the developers of the next cutting-edge tube for microwaves. The third step was the brand. So I'd like to think that maybe Indian companies are following that trajectory, and therefore you don't see them. Some companies understand that, but I don't think enough of us have built that trajectory. So some of us are thinking maybe contract manufacturing and huge volume and revenue is the end of the game. It can never be. You're never safe, in my opinion, till you own your brand. So that's, I'm agreeing with you. I don't have anything to contradict you with.
My question is for Mr. Anand Mahendra. My question is related to building 100 Indian MNCs. How long do you think, how long will it take us to realize this dream? And another question related to this one is, how many Indian FMCG companies out of 100 can become MNCs?
As I said, I'm just an internal optimist, and I mentioned at the end, that was my last slide, that I don't know how long it will take, but I think we're going to have that hockey stick phenomenon. The hockey stick basically is about having growth very slow first, and then when you have a trigger, you suddenly get logarithmic growth. And that's because I think you can express it mathematically, or you can express it psychologically as what I call the emulation approach. We just need, as I said, first to have people move away. Now that's the unknown part. I'm hoping seriously that after the elections, whichever government comes to power is going to move very speedily on reforms, because they've all got religion. They all understand that privatization reforms, market reforms are good politics. If they can remove those weeds, as I call them, then I think that hockey stick will start shooting up faster. So that removal of the weeds is critical, in my opinion. You can't continue to do what we are doing on the growth path with the same handcuffs we've got. And as I lastly said, the psychological handcuff, I think, will come faster, will be removed faster by emulation. These best practices, we are all borrowing. We borrow HRD practices from Infosys. So it goes across companies and sectors. So I'm very optimistic. If you're asking for a time frame, frankly, it'll be guessing. But I think in another 3 years, due to a combination of organic change within and emulation of best practices within India, and of tremendous frenetic M&A activity, you're going to see a huge number of Indian companies going out and buying companies abroad. Because we have liquidity, we have the money, we have the know-how. We're just going to be one of the biggest players on the M&A stage. And therefore, after about three to 4 years, I think you'll see some real genuine MNCs coming in. FMCG, frankly, I'm not really an expert on that. What I do know, and I'm told by my good friends in some of the large, well-known gigantic FMCGs, that their biggest problem today, excuse me, is that they're being nipped at the heels by smaller Indian FMCGs, who are doing exactly what I said earlier, that they're finding nimble, more agile ways to sell the experiences that the customers want. So in fact, they are at risk today. I think you might be surprised that the real multinational FMCGs will be companies you haven't even heard of today, who might in the next 4 years just grow to a scale unimaginable before this.
Having worked overseas in Europe and the United States for over 40 years, and I've just returned to India for a short while, I've noticed a couple of things. Firstly, there are Indians who are captains or pretty close to vice captains of industry in the United States and in Europe particularly, in UK particularly. We seem to be thinking about MNCs going into MNCs, etc. I would see one of the ways of something like mergers and using this human capital that we have got. The Indian managers are probably better than most because they have a better work ethic. Could we not go into some sort of alliances and do what I would call an inverse takeover with these larger companies, and then formulate that as a wealth creation method by which we get our brand image, getting ourselves included in those countries and become a standard in those countries? Do you think we could do something like that?
Could you just elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by an inverse takeover?
Well, you know, there are Indians who are leading a lot of big companies or medium-sized companies. I see them in the Midwest, in the United States. We could sort of merge with them. I won't say merge with them, but just become part of them, become junior partners to start with, and then build the infrastructure to take them over at a later stage, rather than do an immediate merger and acquisition and buy them straight away, or do something which, as you said, was causing problems with the government of doing, you know, having equity in larger scales.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point because it's fraught with difficult ways of how to communicate strategic intent on that part. I mean, if you certainly plan to take somebody over after 5 years, you won't go in there telling them that. So it's harder to have clarity on strategy. But it's very interesting what you said, and we were involved in a bid for a tractor company in Finland recently, which we lost. We lost happily because we thought value had gone out of control there. But the proposition we were making, as opposed to putting the most money on the table, was exactly what you said. We said, look, the person who's coming in there is buying market share through you. When we come in, we're going to build a new business together. And what we're going to do first is to put your R&D manager in charge of our R&D. It comes to borrowing what Tarun said from the West, borrowing I've forgotten the terminology used, borrow strategically, he called it. We wanted to borrow strategically from them. So we said, we have a need for you. There's a complementarity because we don't have a humongous range which is just going to swamp yours. And let's together build from Europe and get into markets which you don't control yet. We've done better than them in the US, for example. So we said we can use your products and deploy them in the US. The management of that company, to be honest, actually for that reason really wanted us to win. Ultimately, ROCE won in, and we just didn't want to mess up our balance sheet with the kind of bid that won. But what you're saying is very interesting. If you go in there genuinely meaning that, and not really planning to take them over 5 years later, but actually build a new entity which is a global corporation, I think they smell that conviction. And I think the managements then quickly get on your side. So it is a model. Again, to answer your question, I think it's a very useful model. It's a soft factor, but it's very possible to do. And it's a very good way for Indian companies to make themselves the most desired bidders, if you will.